Hello and welcome to Stitch and Fiction. I am back with another episode of old-timey crochet fun, and this time I'm going to be using a pattern from 1876. This is printed in a spring edition of Harper's Bazaar, which is available for free on the internet, and I have linked it below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. This pattern was originally intended as a border for a coverlet, which Google tells me is basically a blanket or like a duvet. I am not that ambitious. I am going to be modifying this pattern to make something much smaller, like a bookmark or a doily, or I don't know yet because I don't know how big this is actually going to end up being, so we'll find out what I'm making together. Unlike my previous vintage and historical crochet projects, I will not be working off a written pattern this time because I don't think it exists. These 19th century craft magazines tend to follow the general Victorian aesthetic of just cramming as much visual interest as you possibly can into one space, which makes finding and reading their written patterns a bit of an adventure sometimes. To help with this, they do usually put a figure number next to the image, which you can then connect to the written portion of the pattern somewhere in the magazine, not always on the same page. The fact that this crochet image does not have a figure number attached leads me to believe that there is no written pattern. I think the picture is all we get, which I'm okay with because based on my previous experiences with Victorian crochet patterns, the text is sometimes more confusing than helpful. I'll be studying this image to try and figure out which stitches they were using and how many, and draw my own pattern chart from there. So let's get started. These flower motifs are crocheted in the round, which means they must be starting in the center and growing out. So I think what they did was crochet each flower as a separate piece, tack them together at the ends, then once you have your line of flowers, work the border around it to pull everything together. As with any round crochet work, we'll be starting with some sort of loop in the center. Because we can't see these stitches, we'll have to guess at how many to use. Because we have 8 of these clusters here, I'm going to go with 8 stitches for my starting chain and slip stitch to loop them together. For the petal shapes in the center, these look like triple crochets to me, so I did 8 triple crochet clusters around the loop, chaining 5 in between each cluster. For the next row, we'll start with a single crochet in the top of each cluster stitch, chain 3, make a double crochet in the third stitch of the previous row, chain 2, make another double crochet in the same stitch to make a V stitch, then chain 3 and make a single crochet in the cluster and repeat all the way around. And for the final row, we'll start with a single crochet in the top of the previous row's single crochet, chain 3, then you'll make a fan in the chain 2 space from the previous row, starting with a half double crochet and double crochet and a triple crochet with a chain 1 between each stitch. Then work your way back down with a double crochet, then half double crochet, chain 3, then another single crochet to finish off your petal. Let's start again. Now that I have my beautiful, symmetrical, not at all wonky pattern charted, let's test it out. For this project, I will be using just some pretty standard number 10 crochet thread. You can find this at pretty much any craft store, and a 1.75 millimeter crochet hook. Okay, 3 rows in, and I already want to make a slight modification to my pattern. Originally, I was just going to be putting single crochets in the top of these cluster stitches, but I have this problem a lot with cluster stitches. I don't know if other people do and if other people have a better fix for them, but what I find with my cluster stitches, the top always tends to get really loose, and then when I put another stitch inside that, it just makes the gap even more obvious, and I don't like how it looks. So instead of just inserting a single crochet there like I was originally going to, I'm going to make that a front post single crochet, so it wraps around the cluster stitches and kind of pulls them all together into a nice crisp point. I don't know if that was in the original pattern, it's kind of hard to tell, but That's what I'm going to be doing because I do want this to look nice, and I really don't like the gaps that I get with the cluster stitches. So that's going to be my first modification on my chart. Right, we have our first test motif, and it actually didn't turn out too bad. It's always really hard to tell before something's blocked because blocking always makes things 1,000 times better, but I think we're off to a pretty good start. I did notice one discrepancy, and this was me not paying attention when I was drafting the pattern. These V's here, they actually stitch into the chain, whereas on mine, because this is what I'm used to doing, I stitched mine around it. My camera will focus. There we go. I stitched around the chain on mine instead of into it. I don't know if it's a big deal. I mean, I wasn't trying to make this 100% perfectly historically accurate, but what I might do, because I have to make a couple of these motifs anyway, I think what I will try on the next one is stitching that V into the chain, see if it makes a big difference, see if I like it, and then compare the two and decide which one I want to go with. All right, so I made my second test motif. This one I used I made my V stitches in the stitch like the original pattern image shows, instead of this one where I made those double crochet V's around it, and I think I like this one better. It's not a huge difference, but it does make those V's and the petals just a little bit sharper, so I think I'm going to continue to do that for the rest of the flowers. I was kind of hoping I would be able to make a bookmark with this. If I used smaller thread, I think I definitely could, but we're sticking with the 10 because I haven't gone smaller than that yet. I'm a little bit afraid to. It's pretty clear that I will not be able to make a bookmark out of this. These are the types of books that I would be marking, and you can already tell here it's pretty wide, and this has a fairly wide border as well that I also want to include in this project, and I think it's just going to end up being just as wide, if not wider, than the books that it is supposed to be marking. So bookmark is out, but I have another idea. So this project may be too big for a bookmark, but I think it might be the perfect size for this book shelf. So I'm going to be making a, I don't know if you call it a doily, shelf runner, whatever. I'm making something to decorate this shelf because clearly there isn't enough already. Based on my shelf measurements, I estimated I was going to need a total of 7 flower motifs for this project, so I got to work making more. Then I realized how many ends I would need to weave in, and I cried a little bit. Weaving in ends is never a good time, but it's especially fiddly with crochet thread. In order to tack these together, I decided to use those ends to my advantage and weave them to the points of my flower petals, so then I could just use the existing thread to tie knots around their neighbors and connect them all in a little flower chain. Next, I needed to figure out how to make the border. This consists of mostly chains with strategically placed single, double, and triple crochets that connect to the flower petals. Explaining all this would take forever, so feel free to pause the video here if you'd like to see how I did it. For the next row, you make a single crochet, then another single crochet, then another single crochet, and then you give up trying to make a chart because my God, that is tedious. This project has given me a newfound respect for all you pattern makers out there. The next 2 rows are just single crochets in every stitch all the way around, increasing at the corners. Hello, editor here. I screwed up while filming and kept mistakenly calling this stitch a triple crochet when it is in fact a double triple crochet. So for the next bit of footage, whenever I say triple crochet, just assume that I meant double triple. I am stuck, really struggling to figure out how they made the X stitches in the border, those crosses that go around. From the illustration, it looks like triple crochets that are crossed over one another. So like you would make one stitch, skip a few stitches, make your triple crochet, and then do some chains, and then make another triple crochet, but then go back and insert your hook behind that other stitch. I don't know if any of this is making sense, but that's what I thought it was going to be. But I've tried that and it doesn't work. It doesn't look like the picture, and I can't for the life of me figure out how they did it. It doesn't look like chains, so it's not like loops that they're twisting to make X's, and I'm not sure how they did that X stitch and cross them over one another without the stitches interfering. So I think what I'm going to need to do is maybe see if I can find some modern tutorials to see if anything has a similar look, and maybe that will help me figure it out. I'm really stumped on this one. I haven't touched this project in like 2 months because I got stuck on this, and that's usually what I do when I get really stuck on something or frustrated. I just kind of like let it sit for a while until I feel mentally prepared to face it again. But yeah, so I'll try looking up some more modern tutorials and see if there's some secrets out on the internet that might help me with this one, because I'm stumped. I don't know what to do. Google to the rescue. I found some tutorials that helped me figure it out, and I finally got it. Finally. My initial plan was not far off. I did have the right idea at first. There was just one small difference that was messing me up, so I will show you. All right, so we are starting with a triple crochet, and you skip 4 stitches ahead. So it's at an angle there, and then chain 2, and then you're going to make another triple crochet. The difference here, when you're going back, you are going to insert your hook behind this stitch. So instead of inserting it through the front like you normally would, we're going behind it, and that's what allows us to get this crisscross without connecting to the other stitch in the middle. And there we have our X, and I'm quite sure that is how they did it, because this is what it looks like in the photo. So, success! The only challenge with this, I don't know what they were doing for the corners. So they have a ribbon woven through on the final one, and of course they covered up the corner with ribbon. So it's hard to tell how they were handling the corners, but I mean, I'm not that worried about it because we're also going to be using ribbon, and so we can just kind of fudge it and nobody will see what the corners look like. So we're moving forward again, at last. After finally figuring out that cross stitch situation, I just added 2 more rows of single crochet all the way around. Then the scallopy looking border consists of triple crocheting 2 together and chaining in between, then following up with 1 more round of single crochet to finish everything off. She's finally done! Finally! It actually works up very quickly once you know what you're doing. Funny how that works. All that I have left to do is I've got 2 ends to weave in. I need to block it, and then we just need to put some ribbon into it, and that's all there is. Almost done. For the trimming, I decided to go with a velvet ribbon. The ribbon used in the original image looks like a matte finish. It's not shiny, and the velvet just feels very Victorian to me, especially in this dusty rose color. So we're going with it. The ribbon I got was just a teensy bit too wide for the opening and took a little finagling to make it weave nicely, but we got there. one downside of not pushing through and charting the whole pattern. In the end, one side somehow ended up with more cross stitches than the other, which means we have a rather large gap at one corner. Oops. I figured I'd just cover it up. A little bow would be cute, right? I hit a little snag again. So that section that I thought I was going to cover up with a ribbon, I tried making several ribbons, several different ways, a bow. I tried making bows several different ways, and I just don't like how they look. This ribbon, because it's velvet, it's a little bit stiff, it's pretty thick, so it makes really chunky, blocky bows, which is not what I want for a Victorian project. Victorian, when I think Victorian aesthetic, I think like delicate and detailed, and I was not getting that with the bows I made out of this ribbon. So, new plan. I'm not going to cover this up with a bow. I do need to do something with it because it is a rather obvious gap. That's also where the seam of the ribbons are, so I need something to cover that up. I am going to cheat a little bit and fake a crochet stitch. So I'm going to add an X in here where there wasn't one before. Yeah, I think I'll be able to do that just by looping some thread into one of the stitches, twisting it, and kind of pulling it into place. So it might not pass the sniff test if somebody who knows how to crochet is really like staring at this, but I think the chances of that happening, besides you lovely people on the internet, is very low. And I've never pretended to have extremely high standards here. It's good enough. If it fools people at first glance, it's good enough. And I just want to be done with this project because the longer I work on something, the lower my standards get. So, yeah, so I'm gonna fake it. This was a fun little challenge, even though I got stuck. We figured it out in the end. It's all good. I am still practicing with thread crochet. I still feel very new to using this very, very thin yarn, which I'm not used to using still. There are some areas where I think I can improve. I still see gaps in my stitches, especially some of the longer stitches like the triple crochets and things where you're making several loops and pulling your yarn through several times. But practice makes perfect. Just gonna keep going at it. If anybody has tips, anybody knows what they're doing more than I do and has tips for how to get rid of those loops, is it like a tension issue? Is it a hook issue? I would love to hear about that in the comments. I have already learned a lot from folks in the comments from previous videos that I have done. So thank you to everybody who has left tips and their experiences. It's been really fun to read your comments. Even though there are definitely things that I think I can improve on, I am happy with the result. And the nice thing about doilies is that usually they go underneath things. So if you have any spots that maybe don't look great, you can just put something on top of it. Nobody else is gonna know. It's fine. I do have more plans for vintage crochet projects as well as some sewing projects. So if you like this kind of content and you enjoyed this video, maybe give this a like, subscribe to the channel so you can see what I've got coming up next. Until then, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.